All right, welcome back. Welcome back to our XTraw AI podcast series. And this time we are doing it, we are doing a mini series. We want to do a mini series within our podcast episodes that we do. And here we are planning to have a three-part series, Architecting the Autonomous Enterprise. And of course, as you all know, SAP came up with this autonomous enterprise, and there are a lot of new announcements. And I have with me Ahmed Munir, who is an enterprise architect and a technology leader with deep expertise helping large organizations modernize their complex platforms. So, welcome on board, Ahmed.
Thank you for having me, Raghu. It's a pleasure meeting you virtually and in person a number of times. So I'm excited for the conversation.
All right. So before we get started, I would like to give a quick background about Ahmed. Ahmed, his work predominantly sits at the intersection of an SAP, at the intersection of, I would say, enterprise architecture, business transformation, cloud integration, and he worked with a lot of SAP-centric platforms, AI-enabled decision making, and measurable business outcomes. So, as part of this three-part series, in the first episode, the plan will be to explore the challenge many enterprises are facing today. Why does so much of technical modernization fail to translate into business value? So that is what we want to explore. Where is the outcome? Because many times the business kind of does a lot of this, but where is the outcome? So today we'll try to unpack this. So before getting started, I think I want to maybe start with you, Ahmed. Maybe you can get started like sharing a bit of your personal or a professional background about how you ended up being here at the intersection of enterprise architecture, platform modernization, and the work that you're doing today.
Great, Raghu. Yeah, so, I've spent roughly around 2 decades working at the intersection of enterprise architecture, large scale transformation, and business operation. Um, who am I is the most important piece here, right? So, Ahmed Munir, based out of Dallas, Texas. I'm pretty much a global citizen, if I may say that. Born and raised in Karachi, Pakistan, but then got an opportunity to did my first master's degree from London, England. Really, that was the time that helped me to uh, discover myself, the global perspective, the diversity around us. Um, uh, Fast forward, I started my career with Siemens Engineering, worked across different countries, in Asia, in Middle East as well. Was hands-on in one of the largest oil and gas company to lead and drive their integration program. Moved to US and learning never stops. I decided to pursue an MBA degree. Quite recently, I completed my MBA from University of Illinois, Urbana-Champaign. And as a matter of fact, early in my career, I was very deep in the technology itself. When I started off my career, it was all about ERP modernization. SAP R3 was there. Now it is still there, but it is called SAP NetWeaver, and there are different, the flavors and I would say colors of SAP now,
Right, right.
So integration platform, you mentioned cloud migration, enterprise data architecture, monetization systems. That was me, when I was uh, very, very deep in the technology itself. And for a while, success looked very straightforward to me. I
Mm-hmm.
always used to think about along the lines of, did the project go live? Did the platform go live? Did the integration work? Whatever the type of integration we are talking about, inbound, outbound, API and whatnot. Did the migration completed successfully? Things
Mm-hmm.
along those lines. But over time, I noticed a pattern that really changed how I think. And I think my MBA degree also helped me in reshaping in my own personal perspective, to see the
Mm-hmm.
things from a bigger perspective. And we'll double click on that, what it
Sure.
truly means in the enterprise world. I would see programs that were technically successful on time, maybe a little bit over budget,
Mm-hmm.
architecture approved, quote and unquote, the approval of the different layers within any enterprise. And then after a year or maybe 2 years or sometimes 3 years, the business stakeholders, the business leaders were still asking from each other or maybe from the tech teams the
Mm-hmm.
exact same question they asked before the transformation started. And I'm
Mm-hmm.
talking about really my lived experiences here. It's not something, that I could not tell you
Right.
that,
Right.
which enterprise, is different. It's almost everywhere, a similar experience, The
Mm-hmm.
leaders, especially the business leaders, ask the question: Has my margin improved?
Right.
Has the decision making improved?
Yep.
Is there a operational friction that has reduced? And honestly speaking, Raghu,
Mm-hmm.
that forced me to rethink something fundamental. I
Okay.
stopped now asking, what technology are we missing?
Uh-huh.
Right? I rather start asking, what operating model or the
Okay.
governance discipline is missing? That is the fundamental mindset shift.
Okay.
And
Okay.
and and the organization who is going into the transformation journey really need to answer that question. What operating model would be
Work
changed
for
or
me. Yeah.
improved,
Okay.
as part of the large program transformation? So, that's rediscovery and
No, no, that's a beautiful
reimagination.
journey. No, that's a
Uh,
beautiful journey. I think, uh, uh, and it's very inspirational, very beautiful journey. I think I would like to double click on one thing before getting into the real conversation. I know many companies today are moving from this kind of a project thinking approach to more of a product and platform thinking, right? I think because that is what we are seeing now. You worked across different horizons, different industries, different customers. From your experience, what does that shift actually mean when you look inside a large enterprise? Uh, Maybe if you can give some perspective, then we get into the detailed conversation later.
I think it's a really fundamental and a great question, especially in the era of we are entering into, which is the AI era, right?
Hmm.
And if you just zoom out a little bit and think about the project, the definition of a project means, you have some sort of a quote and unquote the milestone, and there is a finish line. And that's where, the project ends, wraps up, the team disbands. When
Right.
we think about the modernization or the platform, the bigger picture thinking, the project is part of it. It's a journey, it's an evolution in an enterprise world. And that is the fundamental thing that I was talking about, the operational model shift,
Hmm.
right? Because think about, the capex spending that the enterprises typically do, right? To do the a lot of automation and platform engineering in the connected world of different um, softwares, right? uh, Fundamentally the bigger picture remains asking the different question, and that is, let's say after 3 years,
Hmm.
what is enterprise success might look like, you
Hmm.
know Would it be a customer growth? Would it be a customer retention? Would it be a revenue growth? Something along those lines. The three pillars that I always like to say in my conversations or advocate in my conversation is the revenue, your customer side, and your employee's experience, the productivity. And a happy employee serves your external customer very happily, differently, and that gives you, a lot of things that ties with your customer journey, your customer experience management. And it comes, across different value streams, the process streams, the functions, or the departments in an enterprise. Uh, if any of the chain is quote and unquote not connected and working the way the enterprise leaders are thinking about, that's real gap is, and that needs to be addressed. So really the question that you ask is, what is the project thinking versus um, the platform thinking? The project thinking typically is, okay, this is a 4 months, 6 months, 12 months of a project. The team disbands, the business starts quote and unquote doing the running the show or operating, the platform. But that is not, you want in an enterprise, especially for the large program transformations.
So now let me get into this aspect of why platform modernization alone doesn't create enterprise value. So, yes, now that we understand that it's not just the project thinking, but more on the platform thinking and product thinking. So, now let's get into this platform modernization. So, with AI and with all these things going on, a lot of these enterprise firms, I think, they are getting into these modernization programs. But sometimes you lose the connection between the original business case and the actual execution. Why do you see that loss in connection? When is it because of the speed at which we are trying to do, or are we losing the value midway when we are getting into this modernization, platform modernization?
I think it's a really interesting and a great question, Raghu. I would say that a lot of times where the enterprises face the significant challenge is the capability gap illusion. All right, let me double click on that one. That's a fundamental assumption we all enter into sometimes, without even knowing that we are entering into, is what we call the modernization of the platform.
Right.
Let me try to say that better data, better decisions, better outcomes, as simple as that, right? And we enter into this capability gap illusion by thinking that, this is going to solve the world hunger problem, but in the enterprise four-wall boundary, it gives them the what you are calling the value engineering, the creating the value for the business, right?
Mm-hmm.
And it happens, we have seen it. You have a lot of good experience and diverse experience, right? Where you may have heard similar conversations along the lines of, oh, but where is the value? We did all those things.
Mm-hmm.
We brought in the modernization platforms, the modern platforms, and we are into quote and unquote the cloud transformation, but enterprise leaders struggle to answer a simple thing, which is, okay, where is my value? Where is the value
Mm-hmm.
engineering piece, right? What usually happens, I would say, it's not the linear. We live in the practical world. This
Mm-hmm.
type is not the linear, and as a matter of fact, when you modernize any platform, from, let's say, I'm gonna make it up for the conversation, from non-ERP based systems to an ERP based system, right? You suddenly discover that the data is inconsistent in your enterprise. There is not enough unification. the unification among the different departments and the functions in the enterprise. And that operating model hardly changed.
Mhm.
So I think the important realization here is the platform could make it faster,
Mhm.
including the dysfunction. And
Mhm.
that's where, we all are kind of experiencing or are starting to experience in the era of the AI as well. And that's why, our focus is in a lot of enterprises and thought leaders like yourself and many others are talking about, making sure that you have a um, clean core strategy, the data is clean, you have the data workable for what you are trying to drive the outcome. The
Right.
data
Right.
that is going to be clean here in the age of the autonomous enterprises, in the era of the AI, where an action could potentially be taken by a machine, need a very different definition of the clean core mindset and your definition of the data, because the machine is going to be able to operate on what you are inputting as the parameter or giving it
Mhm.
as the input, right? So it's an old saying we all have learned and talked about it number of times, garbage in, garbage out kind of an,
Right. Right.
phrase. Very Java programmers use it all the time.
Right.
That
Right.
said, uh, the realization has to be, okay, what are we trying to drive the outcome and
Mhm.
what matters most? Is it the data or is it something else? Is it the business rules, the deterministic rules or the probabilistic rules, something along those lines, right? And the accountability piece, who's going to be accountable for if something doesn't seem to be working the way you are anticipating it to be. To keep it simple, I think that's the capability illusion gap. A lot of times happen, sometimes unknowingly, a lot of times unknowingly. But by the time companies realize that they have already spent several
Mhm.
years, maybe an enormous amount of capital spending on the platform itself, um,
Mhm.
and that's where enterprise architects come into uh, a really good position, not to just be a technology steward, but the business
So the
and the
business, right?
technology steward, because they are the ones who are very close to the platform. They are the ones who understand the bigger picture by collaborating with the business stakeholders. What are they trying to drive the outcome? So those are the two main things, in my opinion, that matters most.
Beautiful, beautiful. I think I like the aspect of you explaining where how an enterprise architect makes sense, and in this fast-paced or fast-changing world where you are depending from data to decision to outcomes, and then I like the way you have put it, right? If there is a dysfunction or if there is some things that are not working with AI and with technology, now with this AI, agentic AI, what is happening? It is going to be fastened. A dysfunction can fasten a lot more. So, this is where the role of an enterprise architect in this autonomous enterprise becomes even more important, because now you need to understand and map these capabilities, business capabilities on one side and the technology capabilities, and then how do you marry that together and then come to the right place of how do we handle this. So let's get into the next aspect of the disconnect which is happening between the engineering KPIs and the business KPIs. I know you briefly touched on that, because I know engineering teams often they track uptime, they track the deployment frequency, they track the release velocity, and so on and so forth. But the business teams on the other side, for them, it's more about margin, the revenue growth, and the how much am I making, what is how much am I saving, or productivity and other things. Is there? Could you quote an example where a technology KPI looks green because you have done XYZ but the business outcome is still red? Because I know if this disconnect is not addressed, I think we are still running into issues, right? Maybe from your experience, could you quote some examples or could we talk about it, please?
Yeah, no, you touch upon very, very important things, and I'm gonna try to dissect the two differently a little bit, right? So
Mm-hmm.
the first piece of your question seems to be like, okay, where the disconnect typically happen, right, between the technical success and the business transformation success, right? Um, and I think it is a fundamental thing that we at times see that quite happening quite often, right? What I would say is it usually is around the strategy and the execution, right? The strategy starts from the senior executives or the leadership in your enterprise, the four wall boundaries, right? Where they are talking about improving the revenue realization, they are talking about forecast accuracy, maybe also talking about real time operational monitoring or operations monitoring per se, right? Think about the fast moving world of the logistics, the supply chain, and things along those lines, right? Those are the fundamental key KPIs from a business perspective, right? I could not afford, if I am, a part of the organization that is into the direct to consumer business, to have my raw materials getting delayed by a day or two because it's gonna impact my inventory production, as a result, or to keep it very simple, the delivery timeline to my customer, whether it's business to business customer or direct to consumer customer, and that as a result affects the brand of an enterprise, right, or the customer reputation as such, right? Uh, I think the leadership typically signs on off on those outcomes, right? Okay, give me the reduced cost to serve,
Mm-hmm.
the revenue piece, right? Improving my margins, you mentioned, right? Things along those lines. But nobody asks which work stream actually owns the business value,
Mm-hmm.
right? It's all connected world. It's all connected
Right.
functions. It's all connected, the processes. And there is a massive gap, again, between the strategy and the execution, right? And we are all part of it, right? We are all embedded into the whole ecosystem as an enterprise leader as well, right?
Mm-hmm.
As a CIO, CFO, enterprise architecture leader, uh, we own, we owe accountability to each other in that respect, right? And one thing I strongly advocate is something I would say here, very, very important, value stream anchoring. The value stream anchoring leads you to say that every major technical package or every major technical deliverable that we are doing, what is the correlation with the business value outcome?
Mm-hmm.
And if you are able to answer that, then you are always going to have the success in a measured way. You could have a success without the measured way, which may have a friction of where we all, both of us were starting to have the conversation, the
Mm-hmm.
business value outcome versus the technical outcome and things like that. So that's where I see the opportunity, or I would say I would encourage the enterprise stakeholders and the leaders to keep a good check of the technical outcome and the business value outcomes and tie it together, right? Because at the
Mm-hmm.
end of the day, the technology team is there for enabling the business outcome, and the enabling the business outcomes leads to some of the key KPIs we talked about. The improving the margin and reducing the cost to serve to
Mm-hmm.
the business, right? But now to your second part, which is very interesting that you ask about. The KPIs might look green in the technology stream, while the business is still, probably operating in the red line, right?
Mm-hmm.
And a classic example, I would say, Raghu, you are enterprise architect leader as well, is um, a KPI which all of us talk about: uptime. the
Yeah. Yeah.
99.99% uptime and stuff like
Right.
that. And I jokingly say that, but it's practically true as well. The pipe is healthy,
Hmm.
but your water is contaminated. In the enterprise four-wall boundary, what I meant by that is, well, your integration may seems to be working the way it is supposed to be, but the data is not clean, and the business
Yeah.
users is having a hard time to operate on that outcome or the output rather, right?
Hmm.
Because your integration is supposed to have an output which is okay, which is green. The technology team is celebrating, uh, but the business stakeholder, the business user, who is the adopter of the technology that we all build for them, is still having a hard time. So that is a
Hmm.
good real time example of where organizations at times struggle with the technical outcome versus the business outcome, and the behavior and the mindset is the important thing rather than anything else, right? Um,
Right.
the
Right.
layer of enterprises often fail to measure is uh, due to all these sort of the gaps and
True. True.
the mindset and the frameworks and stuff like that, which causes the business value um, uh, not to maximize it with the technology spending and the modernization of the technology. And here is
Hmm.
my fear, to be honest with you,
Hmm.
as you know that I'm well connected into the ecosystem of the platform engineering and whatnot. When I see the enterprise leaders talking about the AI journey,
Hmm.
they're not talking about as often about the AI governance, the control
Yeah.
plane,
Yeah.
you know, and those are the most important fundamental pillars for any enterprise to be successful in the era of the AI. The governance, the control plane, you may call it, or the machine readable outcome ownership are the
Hmm.
important things. And I'm just gonna add one or two things here, and then
Hmm.
we'll build up more conversation. Is you could have very fine models out there,
Hmm.
but if the user of that model could not trace it back how the decision was made through
Was
the model,
made. Yeah.
that is
Hmm.
a problem. That's a big gap.
Right.
We as
Right.
an enterprise leader has to be able to see it, acknowledge it, and preemptively address that.
Hmm.
Otherwise, you could potentially be hearing the failure stories more than anything else. And that's what I'm you know
More
that
worried.
I, I
Hmm.
i i I go as a speaker into a lot of different
Hmm.
conferences as well, and what I advocate is nothing but the governance, the outcome, and things along those lines, and many other ways. I'm not discounting that the model is not important, but the model is as good as what you would give the model to operate on, right? So,
Right. Right.
so these are the things that I'm very passionate about to talk about, and be advocate.
Right. Right. I think you made some very good points before even getting into the governance aspect. You made some very good points that I think the the overall architecture, the overall things that you have put together and the integration, everything might be well. But if the data underlying is not clean enough, or if you do not have the right data, I think you will still not reach that particular methodology or that particular outcome that was agreed upon or that is needed. And that is where you might have a green from a technology perspective, but you're still red on a business perspective. And so this is where I think the CIOs and the CFOs and the enterprise architects, they have to come with a shared metric before even this overall modernization platform or the modernization program begins. Before getting into this governance topic a bit more, I would So my hunch is that we talk a lot about developer experience because that is one thing which is very important, I think, talk about it. But should enterprises, from your perspective, should enterprises also focus on this business user experience or something like a decision maker experience as part of this platform value model? Because what is happening is that we give so much importance on that technology side of the things that you're neglecting the business user experience. Do you have a take on that before we get into the other important aspects?
I think this is the most negligent aspect in enterprise. And
Mm.
then let me give you some real practical use case in my four-wall boundary. All right. And I totally agree that it is very important for enterprise leaders to think about the user experience than anything else.
Mm-hmm.
Because the users are the ones who are going to adopt it. I like to call it the delightful experience, right?
Right, right.
Because the technology, all of us love because it's easy to use, right?
Mm-hmm.
We don't love to interact with the platforms or the technology if it's very cumbersome, if it's boring, if you will, we love to play the games because it's the user interaction is very seemingly easy, intuitive, right? Things like that. And when I did the first master's degree from London, England, the human computer interaction was the one thing that I learned as part of the academic studies. But fairly speaking, we don't bring that experience or that academia learning into the practical aspect of it, right? There is a pressure or there is a fast movement, you know, things going on in an enterprise four-wall boundary that keeps building the things, the solutions, and boom, one solution after another solution. And the user adaptability has remained challenging
Right,
in
right.
many enterprises, right? Uh, what I bring to the table in particularly is just zooming out, right? We build a
Mm.
solution. Is my decision maker, is my business user happy with that? What the happiness here means is it's not like they are okay with the output, but they are also okay with the experience that they are getting.
Experience.
So I would say that what we internally build the orchestration of event, and I'll double click on that because it's very important that your audience listen that and maybe get some inspiration from it. Um, when I started my journey on SAP BRIM in particularly, and with the organization that I'm with, uh, the platforms, the solutions always kind of work, you know. However,
Mm-hmm.
the user experience, the decision maker experience was missing. And here is what it means. The
Mm.
user was supposed to be watching out the platform for one event to finish, the other
Mm-hmm.
event to start, and most of the times they have to do the user action to run the second event, the third event, and the second program and the third program, something along those lines. It wasn't a technology failure. It
Mm.
wasn't a solution failure. It
Mm.
was, fairly speaking, not a business output expectation failure either, because you were running the programs one after another successfully. So, but the programs, the value chain or the events itself typically tend to take 8 to 10 hours
Mm-hmm.
because of the data size, because what data you are manipulating or bringing from different platforms. Fast forward, if you are processing the millions of records from let's say platform Oracle into SAP for billing and invoicing, it is tend to take significant hours, right? It could be 4 hours, it could be 6 hours, whatever the number is. But that's where your question is very interesting to me, and that's what I would advocate, and that's why I'm sharing this lived experiences. Each enterprise leaders have to really think about the
Think
decision
about.
maker experience as well, because these are the things which is going to help with the user adaptability. As a result,
Mm-hmm.
your program would be successful. So fast forward, what we did is, or what I helped to drive the outcome was, uh, I jokingly call the Tesla version of SAP Brain, the autonomous execution of different programs and events, uh, from the orchestration of events engineering. So it's an art of engineering that we did,
Right,
right?
right.
So now the user,
Mm-hmm.
fairly speaking, has to do nothing but um, validate the outcome that the machine is producing,
Right,
the
right.
platform SAP Brain is producing. So all the way from, think about, your order to cash cycle, where you are bringing the orders data, you are doing the rating on your chargeable items, you are generating the invoices. It's all autonomous. All right.
Mm-hmm.
And you are just asking the business user to validate the outcome.
Mm-hmm.
Believe it or not, they're loving it. Why
Right,
won't they
right.
love it, right? Because now you are taking out their, quote unquote, the babysitting from the monitor or the system, and you are giving them a very delightful, rich, full experience of the technology.
Mm-hmm.
You know, I'll just finish it off on this. Is we drive our vehicle, on highways, but the experience of a cruise is very different.
Right,
It makes
right.
us feel very relaxed. It makes us feel very comfortable in driving and enjoying the drive, actually. So that is where, your art of engineering, your the value engineering that I was anchoring earlier, the
Mm-hmm.
or the value creation stream is very, very important. And the industry thought leaders, enterprise architects who are close to the system, close to the reality, has to have that level of mindset in order to bring the value into their own four-wall enterprise boundaries.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Beautiful. I think I like the way how you've pulled this one. I think from the technology enablement into value engineering, because that is where the actual values will tie in for an enterprise and how you get the enterprise value out of it. And this is where the enterprise architects play a bigger role. I know this is where the architects, they build a very strong line of sight how they bring the platform investments an enterprise makes into proper business outcomes. I know you also do a lot of public speaking and other things where you describe some of these things, like this is where I want to get into this governance aspect, right? As aligning your technology, governance, uh, and operating discipline to drive these measurable business outcomes. How do you bring that kind of a discipline into this overall modernization programs? Because now here we are not only talking about technology and also the operating discipline, the business outcome, but also governance. Because now once we get that, I think that's the beautiful way. I think once all these things come together, but what are how do you bring that kind of a discipline into these modernization programs?
Yeah, it's not that easy and fun thing to do, right? So it's a fundamentally, I would say, an elevated mindset shift. An engineer must have to do that first.
Mm-hmm.
It starts from, a bit of engineering, the art of engineering, right? What a value engineering means here is it's not designing for the outputs only.
Mm-hmm.
It's actually designing for outcomes, right? And once the outcomes are clear to you, that as an engineer or a solution builder, you're always
Mm-hmm.
going to strive for those outcomes, right? The KPIs we talked about, the revenue, the customer growth, and stuff like that. A lot of times, uh, the practical reality is the engineers focus on, okay, what is my task, what
Mm-hmm.
I'm going to build, can I build the API quickly, focusing on the output. Those are all good things, don't get me wrong. But the important thing is also to step back a little bit, ask the right questions, and measure the business improvements, and that helps to drive what you are asking about, the technical enablement as a value engineering
Right.
aspect of it, right?
Right.
And those are the very, very important things, right? So there are different layers, and enterprise leaders, CIO, CFO, VP, whatever titles you may give to those things, uh, the leadership discipline, but also the individual contributors. And I would like to, connect the dot here, because we are talking a little bit on the AI aspect as well, right?
Right.
Uh,
Right.
the stronger linkage between the investment or the capex spending, and the outcome, right? Because uh, something I'm gonna maybe using it uh, first time, I would say that for your audience, but call it the value chain blueprint. Okay. And the value chain blueprint, in a very simplistic manner, it's a technology capability tied to your business capability, tied to your process change, tied to your KPI movement, tied with your financial outcome. So if you remember this chain in your mind, and you keep challenging those things or asking those things, you are going to build the value engineering along the way. All right. I'm gonna just repeat it so as people can get it, right? Technology capability, tie with your business capability, tie it with your process change, tie it with your KPI movement, tie it with your financial outcome, right? That gives you some sort of a blueprint. And the
Right.
chain needs to remain visible throughout the life cycle of the transformation. It's not one time act. It's not, the fancy quote and unquote the slides era that you build in the slides, you get the business sponsorship, and you are done with it, right? No, it is not like that. You got to have those conversations in a continuous manner, right? So you bring into the more like the visibility and the reminder in the journey. Most organizations, I would say, that is what you are also asking is the governance cadence, right?
Right.
Most
Right.
organizations have the technical governance siloed with the financial governance. You know what I mean? Like, very few have the value governance.
Yeah. Yeah.
You go to any enterprise and ask the question, where is the value governance? They would maybe saying that, oh, is it a real thing? you know
I get what you're saying.
well, it's a real thing. You got to have the recurring
Mm.
leadership conversation specifically focused on whether the transformation is actually delivering the business impact, right? And it's not just based on quote and unquote the emotions of individuals, right, who may say that, oh, this program is not working, this program did not bring the value, right? So these are the important things, right? That's how you build the value engineering in the ecosystem. That's how you build the value governance into the ecosystem as well. Yeah, I think those are the value very, very important things. um, and I'll I don't know if we are going into the the finishing
Yeah.
aspect of
Yeah.
it, but I would say that $1 million question is, once you modernize the platform,
hmm
irrespective of your enterprise size, and the business still doesn't feel the impact,
Right.
okay?
Right. No. 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 This is where is my
Then
question coming in, which is where I know I didn't want to go too much into the governance in this episode, because I have another episode where we'll go into the decision govern AI and decision governance, and there is another episode on revenue leakage and the enterprise value. But here, the $1 million question or the $1 billion question, which all the times we think about, I term this as the extra AI question as well, because If a CIO comes and asks you, we have modernized our platforms, but the business still does not feel the impact, what
Yeah.
would be those two or three first questions you would ask them? I know with this, I
I
would like to get to the closing of our conversation, but
Yeah, Raghu, that's where exactly I was going
right, right.
into, and then gonna say that, ask immediately. We talk about a lot of enterprise mindset, and how you start off, how you bring the value
Mm,
chain,
mm,
the value engineering, all those things. And if your enterprise, irrespective of the size of the enterprise, right, doesn't feel the impact,
mhm,
ask immediately a few questions. Who owns the outcome?
mm,
Right? We talk about, the connected world, the business functions, and, among different um, uh, stakeholders. You got to start from the beginning. Who owns the outcome? And
mhm.
and if I say that if it is not the business uh, accountable person on the other side, then it's a signal of a failure, because the business
Something
outcome is
is wrong.
always
Mhm, mhm,
is always owned by the business, right? The
mhm.
accountable person. It cannot be your platform. It cannot be your implementation project, or the phases of the project, right?
Right.
The actual business result, if there is no named accountability in your enterprise,
Mhm,
the transformation usually stalls there, because you ask a question, maybe in the middle of the conversation is, what is the difference of a project or a transformation journey, right? The platform journey per se. So that is really the fundamental question. And when I go to the internal conversation with my executives, I immediately ask, okay, so who is taking the business ownership? Who is accountable?
who
And
is
it
the
doesn't have to
stakeholder?
be
Yeah,
the
yeah.
yeah, it doesn't have to be the one person, to be fairly speaking. It can be a governing body in your
Governing
enterprise,
body. Yeah.
depending on the size of the enterprise, right? And it could be an actually um, a governing body with the technology executives in it as well, right? Because it's a co-ownership and joint ownership at times as well, right? Again, the larger the organization, the more the stakeholders could be involved there, right? It has to have the skin in the game,
Right, right.
right? Uh, I think the second question is what I mentioned earlier. What would change after this transformation journey? So if I
Yeah.
may say differently, because we are saying that how the decisions are going to be made differently, right?
Mhm,
Because after the a lot of AI, I don't want to say high, but after a lot of AI investment or any platform modernization investment, if you are not able to make the informed decisions better and intelligently and fastly, then it is a signal of a failure, right? So the question is, who is the accountable, and what decisions are we making differently, right? And last but not the least is the sometimes the process behavior changes as well.
right.
You don't want to just stick into the old legacy way of manual, I would say, yeah, materials requirement planning, or inventory forecasting, right?
Mhm,
Where a lot of times, the process optimizers in their head have the engineering done on their own, because they are better forecasting modelers than your platform. So
mhm,
really the question becomes like, okay, I want to see, the less process friction
mhm,
after this transformation. It could be a faster cycle times, right? From inventory production perspective, right? Meaning that the product that any manufacturing company is producing, right? Is it
mhm,
faster? It is quicker, and cycle times is reduced. So all the two or three questions, should be right up front with the leadership. and the people who are working on the programs, right? Who is accountable? What are we gonna
What
make
are
the
we doing? Yeah.
decision differently? What are the process changes we
Changes.
will
Yeah.
anticipate, through this? And if you tie it with the AI autonomous enterprises, this is exactly the type of
What? Yeah.
questions you want to have an answer with the
Mm-hmm.
clarity, with an openness with each other to have the success.
Beautiful, beautiful. I really love the way how you have tied up all these things together. I know in this today's episode we focused mainly on platform engineering versus value creation, but in the upcoming episodes we will want to go a bit more into the revenue leakage in the enterprise world, and also a bit more into the AI and the decision governance, because it is going to be a very interesting conversation. I hope our I know this is things are changing at a very fast pace, and now with what is happening, kind of tools that we are having at our disposal, people think that it's easier to use these tools and get the things done, but no, I think things get even more tougher and more complex when we try to adapt these to these enterprise systems, because these are very complicated, complex systems. That is what I think. Well, thanks for joining our show. And then any closing remarks that you would like to give to our audience?
So it's been a pleasure having this conversation. I look forward to the building of the more conversation, as you indicated, Raghu. Here in the US, we are entering into the long weekend, the Memorial Day week on Monday. I'm not sure when this podcast would be released for your audience, but I wish you and everyone a happy long weekend. And all I would say from the technology perspective is uh, be curious, and the curiosity would lead us into building something very remarkable and enjoyable for all of us around us. So think about it, be curious, always eager to learn, and share it back with the community. I believe in that. I live with that experience.
Beautiful. Thanks for your time, Ahmed.
Awesome. Great. Thank you.
Thank you, Ahmed, for joining us on XTraw AI and for sharing such thoughtful perspectives on why platform modernization alone is not enough. This conversation really brought out an important enterprise truth. Technology transformation must be connected to business outcomes. Modern platforms, cloud architectures, ERP modernization, and engineering excellence all matter. But the real question is whether they help the business move faster, operate better, reduce friction, and create measurable value. I especially like the way we explored the shift from technical enablement to value engineering. For enterprises moving toward autonomy, this is going to become even more critical. The autonomous enterprise is not just about automating workflows or adding AI agents. It is about architecting platforms, processes, data, decisions, and governance in a way that continuously creates business value. To our audience, thank you for tuning in to this first episode in our special three-part series, Architecting the Autonomous Enterprise. Please stay tuned for the next two episodes with Ahmed Munir, where we will continue this journey. In episode 2, we will dive into revenue leakage in enterprise systems and explore the hidden execution failures that may be costing enterprises millions. In episode 3, we will discuss AI and decision governance and why governing machine-made decisions is becoming essential before autonomy scales. As always, thank you for listening to XTraw AI, where we focus on extracting the raw AI conversations with leaders, practitioners, and innovators across the enterprise AI ecosystem. This is Raghu Banda, and until next time, Let's keep extracting the raw AI conversations. Stay tuned, stay curious, and keep exploring what's next in AI. Happy predicting the future with XTraw AI.